You've likely heard the aphorism, every journey begins with a first step. It's a simple description encapsulating the idea that for change to happen, you must be willing to set out on a path to reach your goals. And sometimes an opportunity comes along and seems to be just the right route to follow. In this episode, we'll hear from Ron Goldberg, a director of digital communication at the New York Institute of Technology and author of Boy with the Bullhorn, a memoir and history of ACT UP New York. Ron was a self-described nice gay Jewish theater queen turned AIDS activist, and while living in New York during the 1980s, he seized the opportunity to join the ACT UP movement. He was instantly involved in protests and demonstrations confronting an uncaring public and ambivalent political leaders who saw AIDS as a gay men's problem, resulting in years of inaction and delayed research into the disease. Ron eventually became an author and chronicled his experiences in the movement and the profound impact it made on his life's journey. Ron, thanks for being part of our podcast series.
Oh, my pleasure.
Ron, before we get into talking about life's changes and your joining ACT UP and how this sort of changed the trajectory in your life, tell the audience about yourself.
Okay, so I'm a New York native, born in the city, grew up in Long Island in Great Neck, and was going to be an actor. I went to school in Binghamton, got a BA in theater, and came to New York, to find my success, and did the usual, cater waitering, office temping, et cetera, and so forth. During this time, I came to New York in 1980. That, of course, is sort of the beginning of the AIDS crisis. I didn't really know anyone who was sick. It was something I was very aware of. And as the years sort of crept by, I got more and more concerned about and wanted to find some sort of outlet and some way to, get involved in something a little bigger than myself. And in 1987, ACT UP was formed, which is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, which, unlike some of the earlier activist groups, this wasn't involved in taking care of people or being in getting people to their appointments and things like that, their doctor's appointments, because that stuff frankly scared me. That boundary between seeing people my own age or a little older who were sick and dying really kind of freaked me out. But ACT UP was about demonstrations. It was an activist group in the street. Demonstrations to me were sort of like, oh, it's theatrical. I could go do that. And so I joined them about 3 months after the organization was founded. So I joined in June 1987 and stayed with the group until 1994, 95.
Wow.
And was very involved there. And that really changed a lot. It's the short version.
One of the things that I want to make sure that people are aware that when AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, was first recognized, there was this sort of isolationist feeling that you can isolate it within a specific group, mostly among gay men. And there wasn't all of a sudden this feeling like, oh, we have to come up with a solution to this. We've got to come up with a cure. And what was amazing about it was that I think that to some extent, it was that almost a homophobic feeling back then that, well, okay, it's isolated to them. It's their fault. Therefore, we're not going to do anything about it.
It wasn't almost. It was definitely that. When AIDS was first discovered in early 1981, 1982, it was called GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, as if being gay was the cause. Now, we found out, of course, that the disease was HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS, was around a lot earlier than that. But because it had finally attacked a population that had access to health care, that was, had doctors, suddenly, oh, there's this thing. And this was gay men. We, of course, then later knew it was involved with IV drug use, sexual partners with people with HIV. It was transmitted through, blood, semen, other bodily fluids. It was very convenient for the Reagan administration and the people involved at the time in government to ignore it because it was happening to people who they didn't really care about. And you had people like Pat Robertson, who passed away today, and Jerry Falwell, who kind of felt, well, this is the wages of sin, right?
Right.
So it was very convenient for them, and no one cared until really 1985 when Rock Hudson got sick. People who's a famous actor, who people sort of knew, and that was the first time Reagan actually said the word AIDS. It was 1985, and he didn't make a speech about it until 1987. By which time I think there were like 32,000 deaths. It was allowed to happen. It was because it was happening to convenient groups. And I think homophobia was a huge piece of that.
No question about it. I think that what you bring about in your book as it relates to you and your engagement in this movement, your book is called Boy with the Bullhorn, is both your memoir and that history of ACT UP. It's a phenomenal read. If anyone wants it, the name of the book again is Boy with the Bullhorn. It's published by Fordham University Press. What it gives it is it's sort of a chronology of the movement, but it also very much is a very intimate look into how you became involved and how you first got involved with some trepidations, but then once you were in, you were all in. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey.
Sure. As I sort of mentioned earlier, I was looking to get involved, and I actually attended a meeting. There was going to be a big march on Washington that fall for lesbian and gay rights. It was very discouraging, actually. And then as I was leaving, this other group came into the main meeting room at the Lesbian and Gay Center on 13th Street. And I recognized some of the people and was like, oh, this must be ACT UP, which I've read about. It just started. I just said, I'll hang by the door and just see what this is about. And I was there for 3 hours. The energy, the intelligence, the passion. It was the first time I kind of felt like, wow, maybe if all these people can get together and we can make change happen. And that's sort of one of the main reasons for writing the book was this idea that while we're taught to be consumers in this country, we're not taught to be citizens. And the idea that a small group of people can make change happen. And I was a part of something where I saw that actually could happen. I was a part of that. So I feel like I'm sort of spreading the gospel, right? Particularly to younger people. It's the idea that, if there's something you're passionate about, you can, get together with some people, figure out what to do. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know all the answers, but just figure out one step at a time what you can do. And you can really change the world in a lot of ways. I left acting. I had this weird balance of like, okay, I could do this sort of, part of the reason I wanted to go into acting was to sort of just share these stories and, be a part of these larger works, or I could do it in my life.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I can do it in my life. It wasn't that, it evolved that way over time. But yeah, I ran committees. The reason why the book is called Boy with the Bullhorn is I became sort of ACT UP's unofficial chant queen, at demonstrations, picking up chants and leading the group in that. It allowed me to become the person I wanted to be. Sort of the phrase, the hero of my own life.
Right.
Instead of looking for it elsewhere, I was able to do what I had only, thought I could do on stage. I was able to become in life. That's very meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously our podcast is called Lessons from Leaders and Entrepreneurs. And to some extent, I see this very much as a leadership lesson that, we talk to entrepreneurs a lot about, following your passion and leaders living their values and reflecting their values in the organizations that they run. There was this social psychologist named Kurt Lewin, and he described culture not as a painted picture, but as a living process and composed of countless social interactions. And culture is sort of that river that flows and friction slows it down and forces speed it up. And depending on where you are within a specific social issue, you need to be a force for change. And oftentimes, not only is that a voice, but it's rallying people together for a cause. And whether that's AIDS activism, whether that's environmental activism. Today, a lot of leaders are now judged by the values that they speak about, but also the values that they act on, that they have, and that they have a cause that they follow. And people want to be involved in any organization that sort of reflects their values today. And I think that to some extent, there was one quote that you got from Dr. King, which is, tension is necessary for growth. And sometimes you don't feel comfortable, but you know what? If you're passionate about it, you got to get by that and join and do something meaningful. And I think that's what your story reflects.
Yeah, I think I was brought up, I'm a nice Jewish boy, that, and you don't get arrested, certainly, and you don't, there's a certain decorum, there's a certain way you try to please everybody. And I became very clear with AIDS is that, if we don't take action, no one is going to, that we are going to have to force this to happen. And that's sort of the Dr. King thing, which is that, he also talks about bringing prejudice, to a boil. Like you do these actions, the sit-in, at the lunch encounters and things that sort of cause these, I want to say, things to sort of explode and bring it into the light so that it can heal. These things fester if they stay underground. And, this way you bring them into the light, they sort of burst open, and so we can talk about it, so they can heal, so that we can move forward. And that's, certainly the role of street activists, which is what, ACT UP, part of ACT UP was. We also, what was really interesting about the group is that we had both people who were out in the street yelling and screaming, but also they were yelling and screaming to get into the room. And once we got into the room, we had people, who really knew, for instance, how drug approval, actually we all knew how drug approvals happen, how to push the system, how the system in New York City worked, how the healthcare system worked. We sort of taught each other these things. So when we got into the room, we could actually negotiate. But our role as street activists is not negotiation. You demand what is necessary, not ask for what is possible. There are other people who can ask for what is possible. I think what you're saying is also this idea that we talk now a lot about living authentic lives.
Yes.
Right? That's, and authenticity is the voice. I know it's true in marketing. At New York Tech, I'm the director of digital communications, and we do the website and we do these other things. So you want to, communicate in an authentic voice.
Sure.
But the thing about authentic voice, it's easier. If you're true to yourself, it is so much easier to be who you are and express who you are, because you're not trying to fit yourself into some sort of, predetermined pattern. And I think that's an important thing for entrepreneurs. I think that's an important thing for people in general. Do things that reflect who you are and what your beliefs actually are. And I think you'll be happier. I can't speak to more successful, but you'll certainly be happier.
Well, no, I think it's an important factor that in life, sometimes doing something new feels uncomfortable, right? You're disrupting the equilibrium in your life. And so after a while, you get past that and then you begin to feel comfortable with it and it becomes ingrained in what you do. And that's for anybody. Right. And one of the things and it was a quote that you gave, I think it was Larry Kramer. You wrote, by 1991, the question was, where are we going? What is the problem with ACT UP? We are losing our radical edge. I read that quote a couple of times because what it reflects is that a lot of times what you're passionate about and you want to change society, it doesn't happen overnight. You've got to constantly rethink the message or change an approach. And we use the term in marketing called pivoting, right? You've got to change. Right. And things evolve over time. And you can't lose your edge. You can't feel like, be frustrated and give up. And it's that persistence and resilience that really makes the difference between those that are successful and those that fail. Yeah,
I think you have to also, there is something to reading the room, right?
Yeah.
Part of it is you have to be able to see what the situation was 3 years ago isn't the situation now.
Right.
For us, it was a question of when we first started, we were this, upstart group, and we were just screaming to get attention, bring attention to AIDS and to push certain things. And, by this time, it's 3 years later, we were now, we were all volunteer. So the overhead was very low. But, but we were fundraising up to like $1 million a year. So we were not this little penny ante group anymore.
Sure.
And we were also in those rooms. We were meeting with Tony Fauci. We were meeting with the mayor. We were in, a number of us were in those rooms. And how do you adjust? And actually there was a tension that grew in the group because, in this situation, we had people who were like, oh, now we're at the table. Let's negotiate. While we still have people going, no, there's huger, the bigger issues, systemic issues, we must stay outside. And that sort of, that was part of what Larry was complaining about, that sort of losing our radical edge. But you do need to be able to pivot. You need to have that flexibility. And I think part of what that's also about is having people around in constant, I think I talked earlier about having these teach-ins where we, sort of educated one another about issues. And if you keep everyone informed, the more transparency actually for us, the better it was.
Right.
Because everyone realized we're all sort of working in good faith and we may have disagreements, but okay, I get what you're doing. I understand why you're going this way. and and I want to go that way. And we continue to do that together. But it's tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. And, look, you've got to bring in various points of view, and you've really got to embrace the fact is that both society, your group, members change over time. They evolve. The message is important. You got to constantly reinforce it. And we see that with any good leader is to have that vision and constantly reinforce it. And then have a set of goals and objectives, both long and short term, that you want to accomplish along the way. You didn't become an author immediately following your involvement with the movement. It sort of evolved over time. What was it about becoming an author and then realizing you had a story to tell? Talk about that journey a little bit.
I think most of us understood that we were taking part in history. It was a key moment. I think we saw how we were impacting the world and making change happen in this huge epidemic. I mean, like many people, I kept sort of, all our documents, everything we passed out. We had teach-in handbooks, we had flyers, we had posters, we had, all sorts of handouts and informational. I'm turning around looking. I have like file cabinets and boxes full of these things. And I think I understood very early that I was a witness. I was a participant, but I was also a witness to history, particularly because I wasn't HIV positive. And so I was going to survive. And I don't know. I think it's also sort of a Jewish thing. I grew up, my father fought in World War II. The idea of the Holocaust and everything that happened was very present in my life. And, this sense of having to, bear witness, tell the story, pass it on. Because also there was I don't think any of us trusted that this history was going to get out there if we didn't tell it.
Right.
I was, like a lot of people, very aware of that. And actually, I started writing mostly to figure out what I had just gone through. When I left the group, as I was leaving the group, I started to write just to sort of keep track. And I did a timeline because I wanted to write. I needed to figure out the chronology, and I used my old date books and everything and sort of pieced it together. And I actually had a book proposal out in the early 90s and had an agent, and no one wanted it. It was too early. The crisis was still going on. No one wanted to read this stuff. So I put it away. I actually started working. I was working at law firms. I was a legal secretary. I was helping a partner manage her practice. That's where I started to do marketing.
Right.
And I was turning 50, and that's when the big collapse happened in 2008.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, the law firm I was at went out of business on my birthday, my 50th birthday. So I was like, maybe message. My life is not subtle. Maybe this is a message here. And actually, earlier that year, when I was thinking about turning 50, I was like, what's important to me right now? I am making money for lawyers, and nothing against lawyers, but that really, I'd always done. I waited tables so I could be an actor. I worked at law firms so I could be an activist. And suddenly all I was doing was the work, that work, and not so I could do what I was passionate about. And I realized, I need to get back to the book. I tell the story at the beginning of my book about Larry Kramer, who was a key figure in gay and particularly AIDS history. He's sort of the screaming madman kind of, a prophet figure. He was one of the leaders who started Gay Men's Health Crisis, which was the first AIDS group in 1982. And he was also one of the early leaders of ACT UP. And I came home from a Passover Seder at my parents' house to an answering machine going with like, Ron Goldberg, this is Larry Kramer. Where is your timeline? Call me. And I'm like, I go, well, when gay Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and demands your tablets, what do? You call him. And, I said, also, I'm back writing this book. He's like, great, send me your chapters. Let me see, And he became a mentor. And it was a story I needed to tell. I felt a responsibility to tell it. I felt it was an honor to tell it. I mean, now I guess, I have a book out. I've won an award. I guess I'm a writer. But it was something I was really compelled to do. Being an ACT UP was the most important thing I ever did in my life, which it is. Writing this book has been a real close second, just to get the history down, not only my own sort of experience of it, and that actually came later. I was really sort of trying to write a history of the group, sort of, chronologically what happened. And the book is very It's in a university press, so it's footnoted and all that stuff. But it's also this personal memoir. And
Sure.
when I was doing an early draft of it, a friend of mine said, you really need to put more of you in here, because we have to follow a journey. We have to follow somebody's, progress through this. And that was really helpful and hard.
No, I can imagine. Yeah.
Because it's been a privilege. It really has been a privilege. And now I'm trying to go around and talk about this work, ideally to, colleges and students and activists about, my experiences and how, if I can do it and if we could do it, you can do it, and sort of spread the gospel, as it were.
Right. It's a wonderful read. I would recommend it to anyone. I think that putting yourself out there and exposing your journey to the public, really, it connects you with the activities that were going on. And I thought it was just a brilliant read. Thank you for producing it.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
So I have a question. So what one word describes who you are?
Oh, boy. Yeah, the one that just keeps coming to my head is engaged. To engage with the world, with art, with people, to be open, present. I know that's a lot of words, so I apologize there. But I think that's really it, to be aware and open to what is around you. Mm-hmm. I live in New York City, and, like everyone, it's like I walk around and everyone is staring at their phones, or you go to a museum and everyone is like, taking photos of what's on the wall, as opposed to like experiencing the art with their own eyes. This weird thing. I mean, maybe that's my actor training too. It's sort of like, experience the moment, be here. What are you feeling? As opposed to trying to sort of like, I'll record it now and I'll get back to it later.
Right. But how did it make you feel in the moment? That's the critical aspect, right?
Exactly.
Right. And what was the emotional reaction you had when you first laid eyes on that piece of art or that building or meeting those people? Mm-hmm. And again, I know you wanted to explain the word engaged, but that's really a powerful force in today's society. And it was funny, I was listening to a commentator talk about the epidemic of loneliness in our country and how people feel isolated. And you're right, no matter where you live today, people seem to be staring at their cell phones. But overall, I would think that that's a good way to be, no matter who you are at any point in your life, is to be engaged. And it's especially important for leaders who want to understand, both from their constituents or the people that they serve, how life is impacting them and what you can do differently. So I thought that was great. Ron, thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate you taking the time and being part of our podcast series. Although he first set out to be an actor, Ron sought a different role when the AIDS crisis beset the gay community in the 1980s. Working with the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT UP for short, Ron found himself as a social activist. He used his voice as a force for change, to help rally people together for a cause. This journey eventually led him to becoming an award-winning author, chronicling his experiences and those of ACT UP, as he said, both as a participant and witness to history. I believe we see in Ron's journey intentional change. Intentional change has been viewed as envisioning the ideal self, who you wish to be and what you want to do in your work and life. It's about exploring the authentic self, to discover the gaps you need to fill and the strengths you need to build. It's about developing a roadmap for turning aspirations into reality. Ron talked about the importance of authenticity. We certainly understand leaders should communicate and act in a way that reflects who they are, their beliefs, and their values. But that goes for anyone in any role. And the one word Ron used to describe himself is engaged. To be aware of and open to what is around you, to be attentive to life's experiences and the people in our lives. We thank Ron for sharing his insights and life's experiences. This podcast is executive produced by John Rebecki and New York Institute of Technology in conjunction with the School of Management and the Office of Strategic Communications and External Affairs. The interim dean of the School of Management and executive producer of this podcast is Deborah Cohen. Our marketing and social media strategist is Petra Shantaraga, and our audio editor and mixer is Brian Falk from Advocacy Entertainment. Special thanks to Professor Ellie Schwartz and Victoria Greco for all their support. Until next time.